Hey everybody, welcome to your horoscopes for the week. These are the horoscopes for the week ending December 10th. Some pretty exciting stuff going on and some pretty not so exciting stuff going on. So we're just gonna jump on in right there. And we're gonna start as we always do with Aries. Jupiter is on its way back. Jupiter has moved direct and is now 29 degrees Pisces, which means it is on the cusp of Aries, which means we can feel its influence much more strongly than we could in the last couple of weeks or so, as it was sort of moving away back into Pisces. In its direct motion, it is going to take the next few months to go through Aries completely before it moves on to Taurus. And then when it goes retrograde, it'll be back for a short amount of time again, and then you won't see it for another 12 years or so. But in the meantime, Jupiter being in retrograde has caused a lot of problems. With Jupiter being all about growth and expansion, it makes it more difficult for things to kind of sort of move forward and actually your goals move, you find completion and move forward in those goals. So that usually plays out with a lot of delays, or a lot of things that just sort of slow down the process. With Jupiter direct again, we're looking at those things, those delays to just sort of magically disappear and things to move forward again in a pace that is a little bit easier, I think, for you Rams. You guys don't like to wait around for things. You just like things to work the way that they're supposed to work, preferably in your time. Unfortunately, these retrogrades are a lesson for all of us that there is no such thing as our time. There's also universal time, and there's timing is everything when it comes to most things, especially when it comes to your goals. So a lot of times these delays actually come up because you're either missing something, you're not ready to move forward yet, or perhaps your goal needs to be reconfigured just a little bit as you're trying to move away from goals that maybe you haven't finished yet. And so the delays are happening because you need to finish what you started before you can move on to something else. There's always a million reasons. And we humans, with our little quirks and weird things, have to be reminded a lot, because it just is what it is. With focus on self, also, this really revolves around self-improvement, and we find a million excuses why we should get veered away from self-improvement on many levels. I mean, it's always a good idea. We sit down and go, yes, self-improvement is a great idea. I should work on that. And then it gets difficult, or it gets tricky, or you get distracted with something that's way more fun than what you're doing. Again, us humans and our little quirks, it happens a lot. We get very easily distracted from what we're supposed to be doing, basically. So Jupiter's influence is sort of helping with that, making things work a little bit faster so that maybe you don't get distracted as often because things are changing, which is good. In terms of focus on self-improvement, this is actually a really very important thing that most of us don't always recognize. I think on some level, we all recognize that we all have good traits and we have bad traits, and we need to use the good traits and maybe work on the bad traits. But a lot of times I also see patterns of difficulty in changing those bad traits or making them work for you, which actually to me makes so much more sense than eliminating them. I mean, obviously they're there for a reason, right? Maybe if we use them to our advantage. So for instance, being stubborn is a good example. Being stubborn is not necessarily a good idea until you're being stubborn about something that makes sense to you and you believe in, and you're sticking to your laurels, and then in which case your stubbornness kind of works in your favor. So this week really is focused on taking that time to put those particular goals together. What is it that you want to work on, accentuate, maybe fix, maybe eliminate? Don't make your list too big, obviously, because that's way too much to tackle. But we're getting towards the end of the year. it's always a good time to put into practice some self-improvement techniques that will help you be successful in achieving those goals moving into the next year. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we're moving on to Taurus. We're going to kick off the week with the moon in Taurus this week as it gets closer and closer to a full moon. But it's not a Taurus full moon this time. We already did that last month. So we're not going to repeat that one again. It's going to be good or bad. It really, I guess, depends on your perception. The moon kicking off the week in your sign, though, does move into conjunction with Uranus, which also includes moving into that square that Uranus has with Saturn currently right now. Focus is on the past at this stage for Tauruses. And I feel like the moon being a part of that might make this an emotional glance backwards, if that makes sense. And that tends to happen a lot when you're looking towards the past. You're either missing somebody or old anger is coming up over situations that took place that you have no control over changing, different things like that. And Uranus continuing to be retrograde also sort of gives you this element of fear that things can't change, which is a big thing with most fixed signs. I think that fixed signs tend to avoid change almost to the point where they create a fear of change, simply because it's just too much work to put into adjusting to the change. It's actually not as much work as taking the time to resist the change before you have to put the energy into adjusting to the change, which is going to happen no matter what anyway. So it's kind of like, in a way, we fixed signs are basically causing our own problem. Happens a lot, to be honest. This week, though, it's really important when you find yourself in that position where you are looking back in an emotional way. There's usually, rather than getting swept away in emotion, let's see if we can't find a way to use that feeling, whether it's trying to recreate that feeling in some way so that we can achieve it now versus then, or to use that feeling towards healing, so that maybe if it's a trauma thing, for example, the feeling doesn't have as many deep triggers as it could. It's those really deep triggers that are really difficult for us to work through, especially when we are having a hard time letting them go. And we all have those type of emotional problems that stem from our past. Most of us do. There's very few people walking around that don't have any kind of past emotional trauma. I'd like to meet one day, though, because it's not something that I've seen anytime soon. As the moon moves out of this, it does get a little less emotional. I just feel that especially around Monday and Tuesday, you may find yourself being triggered more often than you would as you get through the rest of the week, especially because of this square with Saturn. Saturn is very much focused on the inner closet, the past. So it's focused on your trauma. It's literally standing there going, hey, going through your trauma and cleaning out this closet is your responsibility, in a very annoying way. And of course, as a fixed sign, the first thing that we want to do is get stubborn and go, I don't think so. Nobody tells me what to do, right? I mean, at least that's what I do. I'm not a Taurus, but I am a fixed sign, and that's exactly where I go every time. It's my automatic reaction. It's also the thing that really kills my motivation to move forward repeatedly. And so I really try to identify when that's happening and try to work through it and try to get myself out of my stubbornness to be able to see things in a little bit of a clearer way. And it may actually be something that I do need to look at, even if I don't want to look at it. So you have to have some sort of self-control in this process. I tend to look at it as I will grumble and say, I don't want to do this, but okay. And then I will eventually just do it because I know I have to. It's how life is. Sometimes you just have to do things that you don't want to do. And leave it at that. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we're moving on to Gemini. The moon moves into Gemini Tuesday and Wednesday, moving into conjunction with that retrograde Mars and right straight into that T-square with the Sun as well as Neptune. And this is a full moon, a full Gemini moon actually this week as the moon moves into opposition with the Sun. Focus is on the mind as well as the home. So this is actually kind of an interesting combination that actually only makes sense to Geminis, really. In terms of how you think about your home and what would you like different? What would you like to improve on? What would you like to keep? What would you like to get rid of? In opposition with the Sun, which is focused right in the middle of your long-term goals and your career. So this is definitely going to cause one of those problems, those issues where you have all these plans, you just don't have the time to do them, unfortunately, because you're too busy at work. I always look at it in terms of life is this with most of my quote unquote projects that I want to do. I either lack the time or the money, because if I've got the money, it's because I'm too busy making it. And if I've got the time, it's because I'm not making any money. So it's a double-edged sword there, where it just always feels like it's difficult to find the time to get these things done, especially if they're things that you've just really been thinking about for a long time. All of this, of course, is squared with Neptune. Focus is on self. Neptune is in Pisces currently right now, and Neptune is also direct at this point, just moved direct within the last couple of weeks, and is all about your own intuition. And how does that have anything to do with wanting to get stuff done at home and not having the time? Well, it has a lot to do with it, actually. First of all, let's talk about the fact that you're a Gemini for just a minute, okay? Geminis do get easily distracted by what they're doing. And most of the Geminis that I know, not all, but most of the Geminis that I know have a hard time keeping on one task because they think about it, they're constantly thinking about something else. And while they're thinking about that other task, they go, I'm going to leave this here for just a minute and I'm going to bump over there before I forget. And then they never get back over here, kind of a thing. And that actually sucks up a whole lot of time because you're being constructive with your time, but not exactly getting anything done. And that can create a problem, make things very frustrating for you. The other thing that really comes up with this is looking for time wasters, which we all are victims of time wasters. And let's face it, this day and age, we have so many time wasters available to us that we hardly ever can get away from them, right? And so Geminis are no different. Sometimes it's those time wasters, the little games on your phone, sitting in front of the TV. Those things, in many cases, are sometimes the only things that can get a Gemini brain to stop going 10 miles a minute and focus on one thing. Of course, it's got to be really entertaining and really rope you in order to truly get you to focus on that one thing, because that's hard. But let's also stand outside of that for a minute and take a look. If you can do that, then you can train your brain to focus on that one thing, hard as it is. And most intellectuals have a really hard time with this, but it is possible to train your brain to focus on that one thing at a time in order to get it done. This releases a lot of energy because before you're running around with all of these things that you need to do piled on top of you, and it is really just sucking your energy dry. As you lift those things off, you do actually energetically feel lighter, you feel quicker, you feel faster, you feel like you have more energy to put into other things. So bottom line here is, when things get frustrating because you have so much to do and not enough time to do it, the moon comes in and says, actually, here's a couple of simple ways to find the time to do it, and also work with your natural tendencies rather than against them in order to help you complete them, which is really what it's all about. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we're moving on to Cancer. The moon comes into your sign on Friday and Saturday. We're going to end the week with the moon in your sign. And since you're moon babies, this should be cause for celebration, which it normally is. Unfortunately, there are other planets in difficult places that will cause this moon being in your sign to be a little bit of a challenge. On Friday, when the moon moves into your sign, it moves into T-square with Mercury, Venus, and Neptune. And unfortunately, Neptune and Jupiter, Jupiter's close enough actually in conjunction to be a part of that as well, especially as it's currently moving into Aries at this time. This actually creates a bit of a challenge as your focus is on home. Venus and Mercury are focused on career and legacy, and Jupiter and Neptune are focused on self. And so this actually creates a little bit of an emotional chaos, for lack of a better word, when it's typical for Cancers to just not want to leave the house, period. But I have to go to work, but I don't want to. I actually see my Cancer kid going through this an awful lot. It's too hot, it's too cold, it's too not his room, period. And unfortunately, I think a lot of Cancers go through this because being a crab, you live in your house. Wherever you go, your house is with you. When you can't do that, or when you are forced to spend time outside of it, when you just don't feel like it is difficult. And you have to work a lot harder to be able to get to that point. And unfortunately, we can't always just say, no, I don't want to go. But then sometimes we can. I guess it's a case by case basis, depending on what you are actually capable of doing. So if you can stay home that day because you're just not feeling it, why not? If you can't, unfortunately, you're just going to have to grin and bear it. The moon moves into opposition with Pluto the very next day. So right at the end of the week on Saturday. The moon brings those you love into the focus, and Pluto is focused on those who love you, so your support system. And when the two are in opposition, this is probably going to create a little bit of a challenge where you kind of feel like you need support but you're not getting it in some way, shape, or form. And Pluto is very changeable. The energy of Pluto is all about things, where your personal power is, but also it just has this energy where I wouldn't say it does change because it doesn't, but it's so far away and it's so hard to see and it's so mysterious that it could be changing and we don't know. And I think that that's sort of where that feel comes from with its sense of power. It's such a small planet. It's so far away. We can really barely see it. And that's its mystery is where a lot of its power is held. When you're not feeling like your biggest strength is your support system, especially when you need support in some way. So for instance, I kind of see this playing out as getting into a disagreement with someone and going to another person expecting them to take your side on the matter, and they don't for whatever reason. It sort of makes you feel and especially for Cancers, just like, okay, well, that's it, nobody loves me, kind of a thing. And I mean, that's what you want to avoid, is going to that place, because that place doesn't really end anywhere good. It just ends in self blame, self disappointment, self self-pity, self-badgering. It's just not a good place to be. If you can't get support from that person, move on to another person. There are other people, even if in the moment it doesn't feel like there is. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we're moving on to Leo. Focuses on your day-to-day schedule, although the Lilith jumps into your sign right at the end of the week, pulling those you love into that focus as well. Sort of for many Leos, I think that this is a problem, trying to incorporate and make sure that everybody that you love has equal time in your schedule, which is full of other things too, besides just sacrificing to yourself to these people that you love so much. Leos are very family oriented signs. Almost every Leo that I know puts everything they have into their family. And this is a wonderful quality, and it's also exhausting. Most of them don't talk about it, but they go through it. It is absolutely exhausting to be constantly, in some way, shape, or form, focused on these people. And while many of these Leos have families that are very grateful and they give back for everything that the Leo has put into it, most people don't. Or at least that gratitude and them expressing that gratitude is usually very few and far in between, unfortunately. And because it is very few and far in between, it does make it difficult to keep on giving them this energy, especially when it just seems like they're taking it for granted. This week, I feel like there's always another way to look at that situation. And I'm a mom, and I'm a wife, and I'm a daughter, and a granddaughter, and a whole bunch of other stuff to a whole bunch of other people. We all fall short. At times, when we all get to that point where we get sick and tired of putting 100% of ourselves into people who act like that's just your job. And that's just your job really gets old at a certain point. I think for me, it was about 40. And I said, you know what? No, it's not. Period. You don't want to be grateful. You don't get what I can provide for you. And that was my attitude. And I feel like that's going to be a lot of Leo attitudes as well this week, because especially in the middle of the holidays, you Leos put so much time and energy into everything, and not necessarily just for those people, but because you enjoy it as well. It makes it really difficult when you're doing all this and you ask for help and you just don't get it. And you have to have patience with yourself when you've decided enough is enough and you're not putting up with that anymore. It's annoying to deal with, but it's also necessary, because if you don't speak up for yourself, who's going to speak up for you? If you're waiting for somebody to speak up for you, guess what? It's not going to happen. You got to speak up for yourself. And you Leos are the lions. You are the kings and queens of the jungle. So why aren't you? That's the really, really important question, right? So that's what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Virgo, focus continues to be on relationships, with Ceres continuing to influence that. And we, of course, Ceres, we've talked about Ceres for the last few weeks because it's been there for a while, has this very maternal influence. So a lot of times has to do with nurturing in some way, shape, or form. And as we continue to point that nurturing towards relationships, I feel like a couple of things are really going to come out of this for you guys this week. And the first thing is, it's a very double-edged sword being the nurturer in some ways. It's a rewarding job and you love the job, but it can be a taxing job and an exhausting job sometimes as well. And I feel that this week you guys are really going to both sides, if that makes any sense at all. You're going to have those moments where it's like, oh, I wouldn't have it any other way. And then you're going to have those moments where you're like, oh, I'm exhausted and wish somebody would take over. And you guys are Virgos, so you're not going to let anybody take over anyways. I mean, come on. But it is good to wish that, maybe a clone of you could just all of a sudden appear and take over. That would be really nice, I guess. I can see that. But I also feel that your innate nature to take care of other people um, is really what's going to win this week. When you feel exhausted and you feel like you have nothing left, you're still going to be able to find something to be able to help out a friend in need or help out a family member in need, because you just can't help yourself. You have to do it. And that's okay. My only concern about that, of course, is this influence being there for as long as it has, making sure that you balance that, or you walk the fine line of balance between helping and enabling. And that's really what we want to focus on this week. In some cases, people need help from time to time, and that's okay. When you have somebody who's always needing help or the same help, or it starts to seem like what they really want is for you to do it for them so that they don't have to do it, kind of a thing, now you're on the enabling side of things. And when you get on the enabling side of things, you're creating a problem for yourself and that person. And that is what you don't want to do, because you may be able to take care of it now, but someday you won't. And when that happens, they won't know how to take care of it. So it really is dangerous for them, even if they're resistant to do anything, which a lot of times we are resistant to learn new things and be independent. It is, again, part of human nature. So this week, it's really important to pay attention to boundaries. And if you don't have boundaries, to create some boundaries so that there is a very clear line within some of these relationships of where you are willing to be helpful because you want to be helpful, and where you can't be helpful because that person needs to be the one to do it themselves, or how you help them. Rather than doing it for them, you go in for the assist instead. So that's what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Libra, focus continues to be on finances this week, although we are moving into focus on relationships, which brings us actually to something very interesting: your relationship with your finances, your relationship with your money. Believe it or not, we absolutely have a relationship with our money, and we have a money mindset that goes back much further than we realize it does. In fact, I was blown away by a coach who in a session asked, what were your childhood perceptions of money? And I thought, how would you even have a childhood perception of money? I mean, outside of certain circumstances, growing up poor and understanding what that means, I just didn't even think about the fact that you could have a relationship or even a perception of money as a child. But the truth is, we do. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that in many cases, my relationship with money was solely based on the relationship that elders had with money when I was a child. And I had several different influences to be able to influence that. But of course, it was the difficult relationship that seemed to shine through more than any of the other relationships. By understanding that, I was actually able to let go of so many money mindsets that just didn't have a place any longer in my life. I had this crazy mindset that every time I got money, somebody took it, which That is kind of how life is. You get a paycheck and then you pay all your bills, and basically you're just getting money to give it to other people. But as a child, I really was forced to give all my money to another individual, which would basically cement a mindset that says money is not yours, whether you earn it or not. And therefore, it made it really difficult for me to earn money, because why should I earn money if it's not going to be mine anyways, kind of a thing. By working through that, it did sort of help to be able to at least change that, to open those doors for money to flow a little bit more freely. So, what is your money mindset? What kind of a relationship do you have with your money? Understanding that relationship really makes a difference in being able to make money, manage money, invest money, make money work for you. The possibilities are endless, and having a good relationship with your money is really the foundation of all of that, of those things that you're looking for. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we're moving on to Scorpio. Focus is on long-term goals as we move into focus on finances. So really, it's your long-term financial goals that we are looking at this week. And actually, since we're getting towards the end of the year anyways, it's always a good opportunity to take the time to look at your financial goals for this year, see how far you've come, see if maybe you've surpassed your goals in some way, and it's time to lay down the foundations for next year's financial goals as well. Having a goal process is really important, and I can tell you right now that I am living proof that not having financial goals gets you nowhere, absolutely nowhere. In fact, I do believe that the line between those that are successful and those that aren't are those that have financial goals, honestly. They know what they want and they work toward it. Whereas those of us that live in this sort of someday realm never really quite reach what we're looking for, because someday rarely ever comes, really. I mean, for most people, someday usually doesn't come. You have to plan for it. You have to make it happen. This is basically what life is all about, is understanding that pining isn't doing you any good, but working towards it, you stand a much better chance of getting what you want. It's not a guarantee. Unfortunately, in life, nothing is a guarantee, and a lot of it is luck. But you're still not going to get anywhere unless you are coming up with a plan. And when you come up with a plan and stick to it, you tend to get farther than the person who doesn't. So it's really a good opportunity for you guys to pay attention to that and to understand what it is that you want, where do you want to get to, and make a plan to get there. You stand better success doing it that way. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And we're moving into Sagittarius. We are still in full on swing of Sagittarius party as Venus and Mercury move out of your sign this week, but the sun is still very much there and right in opposition with Mars, actually in opposition with Mars and squared with Neptune, which creates a T-square. So it's a pretty big challenge that lasts all week long, unfortunately. Focus is on it's right smack dab in the middle of your long-term goals and your career. So really, it's all about your long-term career goals. But in opposition of Mars and in retrograde, focus is on the mind there. And this is actually very interesting. Our thoughts really do make or break what happens from here on out. So when you are creating these goals, if you're thinking, I'm never going to be able to get this done, the chances of you succeeding in that goal are pretty slim, because you've already set it in motion that you're not going to be able to do it. So chances of you putting the energy into getting it done are not very good, kind of a thing. So mindset is everything. And Neptune's focus is on self. It really comes down to you, what you're willing to do. So everything, you would think that this really isn't a challenge, because you have complete control over it, but it is a challenge because even though you have complete control over it, most human beings tend to not see that. They see only what they want to see, which is by coming up with excuses, I can stay in my comfort zone. And if I stay in my comfort zone, well, it's comfy in there. It has everything that I want in there, whether those things are good or bad, it doesn't matter, you know. It's just nice to stay in our comfort zones. Unfortunately, we never get anywhere doing that. And so therefore, we have to make ourselves uncomfortable in order to change. It's just, this is all there is to it. But that comfort zone is still important. You can still keep it. You can still have it. You can still go there when you need to rest and relax and recoup and unplug and just be you. And by continuing to use it, you're giving yourself a break. You're giving yourself a reward. You're giving yourself what you want in exchange for what you have to do. And really coming up with a system like that makes it a lot easier to step out of your comfort zone. Because for me, I know that if I step out of my comfort zone, it's okay. I can always run back later and I hide out for a minute, just as long as I know that when it's time to step back out again, that's what I have to do. So use your comfort zone to your advantage. That's my philosophy or my advice to you. And that's what I have for you this week. Moving on to Capricorn, focus is on your support system this week. Although as Venus and Mercury move into your sign, they are moving in with the focus of career. And so really it's all about your support for your career. And Pluto is very much influencing that support system this week more than anything. Pluto is a very interesting influence. It's a very powerful influence, and it shows that you have power in your support system because you're Capricorns. You're going to have people there to support you that makes sense in some way. Not lazy people, not, and I'm not trying to say that anybody's lazy, but it's most Capricorns, everybody but them are lazy. I mean, let's just, let's just put it out there, okay? But not people, they always have a support system of substance, people that they know that they can rely on. And this because they've proven that they can be relied on. You rarely see people who are unreliable in a Capricorn support system. They don't even bother with them. I mean, if you bothered with them once, that's the only you only get that one time to prove that you're not needed at that particular point. So when it comes to your support on your career choices, it's really important for you guys to choose wisely and to make sure that you choose from your support system people that are the most intelligent, the ones that are going to help you really make the right choice in this particular scenario. Pluto's sextile with Jupiter and Neptune is also helpful because it reminds you that the best support system is, of course, you. You are your own best friend in this case. So following your gut and your intuition, regardless of what your support system has to say about it, really is your best bet. That's going to give you the best advice. Obviously, is your own intuition and your own abilities as well. When in terms of these career choices, it's always good to focus in a direction that best uses your talents and not necessarily in a direction to where you have to learn a whole bunch of new talents in order to be successful. So I'm all about learning and expanding and growing, but in the appropriate time. And sometimes a brand new job just isn't the appropriate time. Then again, sometimes it is. I guess it does just depend on the individual and how awesome they are. So that is what I have for you guys this week. Moving on to Aquarius. Focus is on the inner closet this week. Not happy at all to be talking about that, but let's face it, it's that time of year and every single sign gets to go through that focus, and now it is our turn. When focus is on the inner closet, with Saturn breathing down our neck, saying, this is your responsibility to take care of this, making it even more of a pain in the behind, I will just say, I'll just add there. The secret closet is basically where we hide all of our trauma, all of our discomfort, all of the things that make us emotional that we don't want to deal with. So we just kind of sort of put them away and stuff it in that closet. And you can't say that one sign or another sign holds more trauma. We all just hold it differently. The amount of trauma that we hold is solely based on the individual's path, the individual's journey, and what that particular individual went through during that journey, period. So, not to sit here and say that Aquarians have a lot of junk in their trunks, but because Aquarians tend to avoid anything that's unpleasant and put it in that trunk, they do tend to have a lot of junk in their trunks because there's all kinds of stuff in there that maybe doesn't need to be sitting there anymore. Now, the problem with holding on to this junk, even if it's energetic, is that it slows you down, it weighs you down, and emotionally, there's only so much that you can put in there before the barrier breaks and it all comes flooding out at once. And trust me, this Aquarian has been there more than once. It is unpleasant. It is embarrassing. It is almost always in public where I don't want to be. It is far better to take the time to look at it, to deal with it, to delve into a little bit of it, make sense of it, process it, accept it, unfortunately, and then let it go. For instance, when you have trauma as a child, most of us tend on stuffing that trauma away. And then things happen that trigger the feelings around that trauma. And when those triggers come up, it creates a response, and we tend to respond to the current situation emotionally in a way that in many cases is inappropriate for that particular situation. The more you understand where the trigger is coming from, and the more you separate yourself from that child's anger, the less chance you have of reacting to an old trigger in a current situation. So, for instance, I had a lot of trauma as a child, and one individual in particular caused much of that trauma. And there's a lot of triggers because of it. The more I understand and take the time to stop myself from reacting, to understand where the trigger is coming from, to understand why I feel the way I do about this current situation, it doesn't take more than a couple of minutes to identify it's a trigger, separate that this is old, and then focus on what I need to focus on now. But the thing that you also have to do is later on, when you're not dealing with the current situation, is to bring it back to understand why it is still a trigger. It is still triggering this emotional response in some way. By doing this, you start to lighten the load a little bit. Now you're not in danger of having an emotional situation in public because, we're Aquarians. We like to pretend that we have no emotions at all, other than the ones that we choose to have. So, and I'm very much one of those people. I'm not a public griever. I would rather be caught dead than being emotional in public in any way, shape, or form. Even with anger, I went years working at a place and had a literal overflow of temper and scared everybody because they'd never seen it. They didn't realize it existed. And of course, I didn't realize that they hadn't seen it before. So really, it was a shock for everybody when it comes down to it. That's how much control I have over my feelings and my emotions. I'd rather not have other people deal with that unless it is absolutely necessary for that to happen. And for you guys that may be very, very similar, it's better to deal with your junk in the trunk by yourself than it is to put it off. And then all of a sudden, that junk just comes piling out when you don't want it to. Think about it that way. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And finally, we're going to move on to Pisces. It is all about you, Pisces, this week. Focus continues to be on self, and Jupiter and Neptune continue to bring that focus forward. Jupiter, of course, is all about expansion and growth and expansion. So it is a lot about growth of self in many ways, because Neptune is all about intuition and our intuitive abilities. And to really mirror that back at ourselves is a big deal, especially for you Pisces. Neptune is your ruling planet after all, and Neptune's been in Pisces for ever now. I mean, as long as I've been doing horoscopes, which is quite a few years, Neptune has been in Pisces. It's not to say that Neptune will never leave Pisces. It has to eventually, but usually it's there for a good 10 years or so. So we're probably going to continue to have Neptune in Pisces for a couple more years, but eventually it is going to leave. But this is your ruling planet. Pisces is technically all 12 signs in one, has all of the elements of each of the signs that came before it, and it is a very mystical and very magical sign because of that. So really, self-improvement is actually your improvement. It's about embracing things about yourself that maybe you questioned before or didn't quite understand before. Maybe it's about growing into parts of yourself that you haven't really embraced yet. And we do this like over and over and over again from the time that we're born until the time that we die. And then, but at some point in our middle age, we, for whatever, get this notion in our head that I'm done growing because I've done everything already. And that's not necessarily true. You really want to be open to the fact that there is always an opportunity for us to be another person, to be a better person, to be a worse person, to be a good friend, to be a bad friend. There's every single day, there's opportunities to do all of those things. The difference between people is those who take control and make the decisions of who they're going to be instead of allowing life to make that decision for them. When you let life make that decision for you, it does not always work out in your favor. So that's what I have for you guys this week. And that's what I have for everybody. Thank you so much for watching the horoscopes. I'm Melissa Bruce, the Heavy Metal Psychic. I will see you guys next week. Make it a great week, everybody.